You've written a blog post on what you've been up to. You wrote this in October 2022. Quote, mostly I try to learn a lot. For example, the political events of 2014 to 2016 made clear to me that I didn't understand politics at all, referencing maybe some of this book here. So I deliberately withdrew from political engagement and fundraising and instead read my way back into history and as far to the political left and political right as I could. So just high-level question, what's your approach to learning?
Yeah, so it's basically, I would say I'm an autodidact. So it sort of it's going down the rabbit holes. So it's a combination. So I kind of allude to it in that quote. It's a combination of breadth and depth. Mm-hmm. And so I go broad by the nature of what I do. I go broad, but then I tend to go deep in a rabbit hole for a while, read everything I can, and then come out of it. And I might not revisit that rabbit hole for another decade.
And in that blog post that I recommend people go check out, you actually list a bunch of different books that you recommend on different topics on the American left, on the American right. It's just a lot of really good stuff. The best explanation for the current structure of our society and politics, you give 2 recommendations: 4 books on the Spanish Civil War, 6 books on deep history of the American right, comprehensive biographies of Adolf Hitler, one of which I read, I can recommend, 6 books on the deep history of the American left. So American right, American left, looking at the history to give you the context. Biography of Vladimir Lenin, 2 of them on the French Revolution. Actually, I have never read a biography on Lenin. Maybe that would be useful. Everything's been so Marx focused.
The Sebastian biography of Lenin is extraordinary.
Victor Sebastian.
It'll blow your mind. Yeah.
So it's still useful to read.
It's incredible. Yeah, it's incredible. I actually think it's the single best book on the Soviet Union.
So that the perspective of Lenin might be the best way to look at the Soviet Union versus Stalin versus Marx versus. Very interesting. So 2 books on fascism and anti-fascism by the same author, Paul Gottfried. Brilliant book on the nature of mass movements and collective psychology. The definitive work on intellectual life under totalitarianism, The Captive Mind. The definitive work on the practical life under totalitarianism. There's a bunch. And the single best book, first of all, the list here is just incredible. But you say the single best book I have found on who we are and how we got here is The Ancient City by Numa Dennis Fostel de Coulanges. I like it. What did you learn about who we are as a human civilization from that book?
Yeah, so this is a fascinating book. This one's free. It's free, by the way. It's a book from the 1860s. You can download it or you can buy prints of it. But it was this guy who was a professor at the Sorbonne in the 1860s, and he was apparently a savant on antiquity, on Greek and Roman antiquity. And the reason I say that is because his sources are 100% original Greek and Roman sources. So he wrote basically a history of Western civilization from on the order of 4,000 years ago to basically the present times, entirely working on original Greek and Roman sources. And what he was specifically trying to do was he was trying to reconstruct from the stories of the Greeks and the Romans. He was trying to reconstruct what life in the West was like before the Greeks and the Romans, which was in the civilization known as the Indo-Europeans. And the short answer is, and this is sort of circa 2000 BC to sort of 500 BC, kind of that 1500-year stretch where civilization developed. And his conclusion was basically cults. They were basically cults, and civilization was organized into cults, and the intensity of the cults was like a millionfold beyond anything that we would recognize today. Like, it was a level of all-encompassing belief and an action around religion that was at a level of extremeness that we wouldn't even recognize it. And so specifically, he tells the story of basically there were 3 levels of cults. There was the family cult, the tribal cult, and then the city cult as society scaled up. And then each cult was a joint cult of family gods, which were ancestor gods, and then nature gods. And then your bonding into a family, a tribe, or a city was based on your adherence to that religion. Mm-hmm. People who were not of your family, tribe, city worshiped different gods, which gave you not just the right, but the responsibility to kill them on sight. Right.
So they were serious about their cults.
Hardcore. By the way, shocking development. I did not realize there's zero concept of individual rights. Like even up through the Greeks and even into the Romans, they didn't have the concept of individual rights. Like the idea that as an individual you have like some right, it's just like nope, right? And you look back and you're just like, wow, that's just like crazily like fascist in a degree that we wouldn't recognize today. But it's like, well, they were living under extreme pressure for survival. And the theory goes you could not have people running around making claims to individual rights when you're just trying to get like your tribe through the winter, right? Like you need like hardcore command and control. And so actually, what if through a modern political lens, those cults were basically both fascist and communist. They were fascist in terms of social control, and then they were communist in terms of economics.
But you think that's fundamentally that like pull towards cults is within us.
Well, so my conclusion from this book, so the way we naturally think about the world we live in today is like we basically have such an improved version of everything that came before us, right? Like we have basically we've figured out all these things around morality and ethics and democracy and all these things, and like they were basically stupid and retrograde, and we're like smart and sophisticated, and we've improved all this. I after reading that book, I now believe in many ways the opposite, which is no, actually we are still running in that original model. We're just running in an incredibly diluted version of it. So we're still running basically in cults. It's just our cults are at like 1,000th or 1,000,000th the level of intensity, right? And so just as to take religions, the modern experience of a Christian in our time, even somebody who considers them a devout Christian, is just a shadow of the level of intensity of somebody who belonged to a religion back in that period. And then, by the way, we have it goes back to our AI discussion. We then sort of endlessly create new cults. Like we're trying to fill the void, right? And the void is a void of bonding. Okay. Living in their era, like everybody living today, transporting that era would view it as just like completely intolerable in terms of like the loss of freedom and the level of basically fascist control. However, every single person in that era, and he really stresses this, they knew exactly where they stood. They knew exactly where they belonged. They knew exactly what their purpose was. They knew exactly what they needed to do every day. They knew exactly why they were doing it. They had total certainty about their place in the universe.
So the question of meaning, the question of purpose was very distinctly, clearly defined for them.
Absolutely, overwhelmingly, indisputably, undeniably.
So as we turn the volume down on the cultism,
yes,
we start to the search for meaning starts getting harder and harder.
Yes, because we don't have that. We are ungrounded. We are uncentered, and we all feel it, right? And that's why we reach for it's why we still reach for religion. It's why we reach for people start to take on let's say a faith in science maybe beyond where they should put it. And by the way, like sports teams are like they're like a tiny little version of a cult, and the Apple keynotes are a tiny little version of a cult, right? And political, and there's there's full blown cults on both sides of the political spectrum right now, right? Operating in plain sight,
but still not full blown compared as to what it was.
Compared to what it used to. I mean, we would today consider full blown, but like yes, they're at like I don't know 100,000th or something of the intensity of what people had back then. So we live in a world today that in many ways is more advanced and moral and so forth, and it's certainly a lot nicer, much nicer world to live in. But we live in a world that's like very washed out. It's like everything has become very colorless and gray as compared to how people used to experience things, which is, I think, why we're so prone to reach for drama. We there's something in us deeply evolved where we want that back.
And I wonder where it's all headed as we turn the volume down more and more.